Lighted Deep. Hello everyone, wishing you all good health and peace in life. A new chapter quietly unfolds, a new life begins. Left with no choice but to be strong. Diep embraces both roles, a mother and a father. She carries the weight of responsibility, yet within her shines a gentle strength, proving that love alone can build a family, even in the face of loneliness. The city lights never slept, yet CEO James often felt like a lonely shadow among them. Meetings, betrayals, endless deals. His world was built on numbers and contracts. But every night when silence returned, he realized what he truly missed was not a victory at the boardroom table, but the warmth of Diep's quiet smile. Still, his pride and the chaos surrounding his company kept him far away, locked in battles only he could fight. Back in the countryside, Diep carried her burdens in silence. She sold pineapples at the market, cared for her small house, and prayed for James's safety though he was far from reach. One fateful afternoon, her life shifted forever. She found a little girl, no older than 6, standing alone in the crowd with tears streaking her dusty face. No one claimed her. No one cared to stop, but Diep did. She knelt, brushed the child's hair from her eyes, and whispered gently, "You can come with me until we find your mother." The little girl, Nee, clung to her hand as if she had been waiting all her life for someone to offer love. That night, when Diep cooked a simple meal of rice and vegetables, she placed an extra bowl on the table. Nee smiled for the first time, and in that small gesture, something inside Diep opened wider than she expected. She had given the girl food and shelter, but in return, the child gave her purpose and courage. Days turned into weeks. Diep worked harder, not only for herself, but also for the little one who now called her mother in a trembling voice. The villagers whispered, some with pity, some with admiration, but Diep ignored them all. For her, love was not bound by blood, it was the choice to protect, to nurture, to give hope. Far away, James's phone lit up late at night with a message from Diep. She never asked for money, never complained, never demanded. Instead, she sent him a photo, Diep holding Nee, both of them smiling under the sun. For the first time in months, James felt his chest tighten, not with the pressure of his enemies, but with the weight of longing. "Who is she?" he asked during their next call, his voice rough with exhaustion. "A child who had no one," Diep replied softly. "I couldn't turn her away. She reminds me that life is still worth fighting for." James fell silent. He could hear Nee's laughter in the background, light and innocent, filling the space that had once been so lonely. That sound reached deeper than any business victory ever could. Suddenly, the battles he was fighting felt hollow. The money, the power, the endless meetings, none of them mattered compared to what was waiting for him in that small village. It was Nee's presence that bridged the distance between them. Through her, James saw not just Diep's strength, but also the life they could build together. A life where laughter was louder than silence, where love was stronger than fear. For the first time, James allowed himself to imagine returning not as the untouchable CEO, but as a man who belonged to a woman and a child who had given him a reason to come home. In the end, it was not ambition, nor duty, that pulled him back. It was a little girl's smile, and the woman who chose to love without hesitation. She was the link, the fragile yet unbreakable bond that made James think about returning to Diep. James stared at the photo of Diep and little Nee long after the call ended. The smile on Diep's face was gentle yet firm, the smile of a woman who had learned to stand strong even when life tested her again and again. And Nee innocent, radiant, clinging to Diep as if she had always belonged there. For the first time in years, James felt that his empire of glass and steel meant nothing if he could not share it with them. But the road home was not so simple. His company was still under siege. Rivals whispered lies, Investors pulled away, and shadows from the past clawed at him. Yet the more James fought, the more he realized his strength no longer came from the boardroom. His strength came from the thought of Diep waiting at home, raising a child with nothing but her will and her heart. One night, after another endless meeting, James left his office and stood alone under the city sky. His driver waited, but James waved him off and walked the streets in silence. Neon lights blurred in his vision, but in his heart, a single image shone clearly, Diep's hands cradling Nee's head, her voice humming a lullaby. That was his real victory, the life worth protecting. Days later, James booked a flight back to the countryside without announcing it to anyone. He wanted no grand return, no attention. He simply wanted to see her. The closer the car drove to the small village, the more his heart pounded, not with fear of failure, but with longing. When he arrived at Diep's modest home, evening light was spilling over the fields. He saw her outside, carefully hanging clothes on a bamboo line. Beside her, little Nee played with a wooden toy, laughing freely. For a moment, James did not step forward. He just watched, feeling the strange warmth of belonging seep into his tired soul. Finally, Diep turned, sensing his presence even before she saw him. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then softened with something unspoken. Nee stopped playing and looked up curiously at the tall man standing at the gate. James's voice was low, almost trembling. "Diep, I'm home." She didn't rush to him, nor did she scold him for leaving so long. Instead, she simply smiled, the kind of smile that forgave and welcomed at once. And when Nee shyly tugged at her dress and whispered, "Mother, who is he?" Diep bent down and answered softly, "He is someone very important to us." At that moment, James knew the truth. He was no longer just a CEO fighting for a collapsing empire. He was a man who had been given a second chance through the love of a woman and the laughter of a child, and he swore silently that he would never let go of that bond again. The first night James spent back in the village felt almost unreal. The crickets sang in the quiet fields, a world away from the noise of corporate towers and sleepless boardrooms. He sat outside with Diep after Nee had fallen asleep, the soft glow of an oil lamp flickering between them. For a long while, neither spoke. Diep simply looked at him, as though weighing his presence whether he was truly here to stay, or if this was another fleeting return. Finally, she broke the silence. "You look different, James," she said gently, not weaker, but tired. "What are you carrying on your shoulders that makes you so heavy?" James's eyes lowered. He wanted to protect her from the truth, but he knew he could not lie to Diep. "My company is collapsing. Rivals have stolen contracts, investors have pulled out, and John," his jaw tightened at the name, "he's been pulling strings behind the scenes, waiting for me to fall. But Diep, none of that hurts as much as the thought of losing you." Diep reached across the table, her hand brushing his. Her voice was soft but steady. "You are not alone anymore. Whatever storm is coming, you don't face it by yourself." Her words sank deep into him, stronger than any promise he had ever heard in a boardroom. In that moment, James realized why he had come back. It wasn't to escape. It was to fight with new purpose. The following morning, he walked Nee to the market with Diep. The little girl's laughter lit the streets, her small hand gripping his as though she had always known him. Villagers watched curiously, whispering about the stranger who now walked beside Diep. For James, it was humbling. For once, he wasn't the powerful CEO with an army of suits. He was just a man learning to hold the trust of a child. But peace never lasts long. Later that week, a black car appeared at the edge of the village. James saw it first while working in the garden with Diep. The same stranger who had once followed her stepped out, his eyes cold and calculating. "You've hidden yourself well, James," the man said, voice dripping with disdain. But you can't run forever. John is waiting, and he won't stop until everything you love is ruined. James's fists clenched, but Diep touched his arm, grounding him. We will not be threatened, she said firmly, her voice carrying more steel than the man expected. This is our home. The stranger smirked, but his gaze flickered to Nee playing nearby before he returned to the car. The unspoken threat lingered like poison in the air. James turned to Diep, his chest heavy. This is exactly why I didn't want to come back yet. They will come after you, after her. Diep shook her head, her hand resting over his. No, James. This is why you needed to come back. Because together, we are stronger than the fear they tried to plant in us. For the first time in weeks, James allowed himself to breathe. Her courage flowed into him, igniting a fire he thought he had lost. If John wanted a war, then James would fight, but this time, not for pride, not for wealth. He would fight for Diep, for Nee, and for the life they had begun to build together. In a world where success is often measured by money, titles, and recognition, it is easy to forget the things that give life its deepest meaning. James, a man once consumed by business wars and power struggles, rediscovered something far greater when he returned to Diep and embraced little Nee. Their story reminds us that the true measure of wealth is not found in numbers on a screen, but in the bonds we create with people who love us. Diep's quiet strength shows us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the steady hand that comforts a child, or the voice that whispers faith into someone who is losing hope. By opening her heart to Nee, even without knowing what the future would bring, she proved that love does not wait for perfect circumstances. Love is the act of choosing to care, even when uncertainty lingers. For James, the lesson was humbling. His return was not an escape from failure, but a turning point. He learned that leadership is not just about winning in boardrooms, it is also about protecting and nurturing those who depend on you. Through Diep and Nee, he realized that strength is not found in control, but in compassion. The greatest lesson we take from their journey is that home is not a place of walls and doors, but the hearts that welcome us without condition when storms of life threaten to tear us apart. It is love that anchors us, reminding us of who we are and what we truly fight for. True love is never about perfection. It is about presence. Diep did not need James to return with riches or promises of a powerful future. What she longed for was his willingness to stand beside her, to face uncertainty together, and to protect the fragile yet beautiful bond they were forming with little Nee. In that simplicity lies a truth often forgotten. People remember not the size of your achievements, but the warmth of your heart. Adopting Nee was more than an act of kindness. It was a decision that transformed both Diep and James. The little girl, innocent yet strong in her own way, became a mirror reflecting what truly mattered. Her laughter softened James's hardened spirit, while her trust in Diep reminded everyone that even in pain and loss, one can still find a reason to hope. Life will always bring storms. Betrayal, failure, and fear are unavoidable. Yet, this story teaches us that storms do not have the power to destroy those who anchor themselves in love. James and Diep learned that together they could face enemies, rebuild from nothing, and endure the weight of the past. Nee was not just a child who needed shelter. She was the bridge that connected to hearts, making them stronger than they had ever been. The lesson is clear. When we choose compassion over fear, unity over pride, and love over ambition, we gain a kind of strength that no one can take away. Success may fade, wealth may vanish, but the bonds of the heart remain eternal.